was the co-founder of the New World Archaeological Foundation and was the author of many books. Now, he really focused on archaeology and the Book of Mormon and what he believed were parallels found in ancient America, Mesoamerica, and a little bit in North America as well, to the Book of Mormon people. So that's what he wrote there. He wrote with an old journalist hat, that he always wrote with that. And then as he got older, which we'll see, he got a little more interested in the history of North America as well. So as a young, I'll go back here, literally as a 10-year-old boy, I was reading his books and just ate it up. So my love for history, it was in the blood, established early. And it's because my grandpa and then my parents are extremely history literate and encouraging. So it's definitely a family thing. So, you know, reading these books, I grew up really wanting to do a church mission, we'll call it a church mission in Central America. That's where I thought, you know, the real interesting cultures were. And they are, but that's really where I wanted to go. I got my mission call to Ohio, and you know, I was like, oh, I was a little bummed out, but you know, I didn't know anything about the cultures there. So immediately, well, the first thing you know is about, anybody been to Ohio here, or the Midwest? So beautiful, right? You see flashes of brilliant red in the trees of the cardinals, and the falls are just gorgeous. And you know, I could leave the winters, but every other season is great. And the fireflies are just magical. So the mound builders, and my first area was in Miamisburg. And so the Adena culture is the early mound builder culture. It's vary, but you know, we'll say roughly from 2000 BC to 400 AD, or about 400 BC. I'm sorry. Of course, the Hopo culture was the culture that came after them and ended about 480. But anyway, this is the largest Adena mound. That's a picture from on top, and then that's just a picture of it. And they built the conical mounds. And so, you know, I got to Ohio and I saw these mounds, and then the dates with them are like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know there were these ancient cultures in North America, right? We're not really taught that. But me and my parents and I just got back from Cahokia. I don't know if any of you have been there, but the largest pyramid there is larger than the Pyramid of Giza, and it is not found in our history books. Their children today are just not talk about it. They don't talk about it. So this is Chillicothe, another area I served in. Again, mounds all over the place. This is by Moundville State Park. And on our preparation day, we would play sports, literally a park right here. And we'd play football next to these mounds, and then I'd go over and I'd look at them like, wow, look at these dates. I mean, this stuff is old. Newark, I ended up there. I mean, I was chosen to serve in the special spot. So Newark was super interesting. I've always been skeptical a little bit of solar alignments. I think if you could go out to the parking lot and to your car and find some solar alignments. So I've always been a little skeptical of it. But there were two researchers, and one was from the UK that was an expert on Stonehenge, and then they went and studied the Newark site looking for solar alignments, and they were also, kind of skeptical, and they were really surprised that they found none. They didn't find any solar alignments, and what they found were at least 8 lunar alignments. And that is really interesting because the Middle Eastern cultures align their structures, Temple of Solomon and so forth, to the moon, lunar alignments. And so that is a clear sort of separation from Mesoamerican cultures to the mound builders, is the Mesoamerican cultures are much more solar oriented. In North America, we get much more alignments to the moon. Newark Holy Stones, some of you may be familiar with these. So right outside of Newark is a little town called Geshocton. There's a museum there, the Johnson Farmhouse. You go there, and we went in there, and this was one of their main exhibits, and I was just blown away, right? So on there, the middle one there is the Decalogue stone, and that's an older version of Hebrew that has the 10 Commandments, and the top symbol there is a symbol for Moshe, or Moses. And you know, there's other interpretations of that as well, but most scholars say it's Moses. And this is the keystone to the left, I guess to your right, which says "Holiness to the Lord" in block Hebrew. So fascinating stuff. Immediately controversial, right? Because what are ancient Hebrews doing in North America? But very interesting. So I came home with a real sort of, wow, there's some cool stuff right in our own country. You don't have to go to Egypt. You don't have to go to Central America. So this is how it's relevant. Did ancient cultures around the world know about the ancient Americas? And if yes, why? What was the real reason? Who were they, when, and where? So the main reason we find ancient cultures coming to the ancient Americas is trade. Commerce is the main reason why. And we could talk about, anybody read Frank Joseph? Anybody familiar with him? He has a great book about ancient colonies in the Americas of different cultures. I really highly recommend that one. So I'll just highlight a few here because again it's relevant to Michigan. Frank Joseph. And he writes a lot about North America and in ancient contact with North America. But just wanted to highlight a few of these cultures. But first, let's talk about copper, because everything really evolves around this. This is why ancient civilizations knew about Michigan. So copper is interesting. So native copper, or float copper, is pure copper. Now most other mines throughout the world have, it's an ore, essentially. And so it's a mixture, it's not pure copper. So pure copper is much more desirable, it's easy to work with, it's much more valuable. So Michigan copper is 97% copper, and then it has a really unique mix with silver. And so essentially, and then they have a nickname, geologists have a nickname for this, they call them half-breeds, when it has this certain amount of pure copper and then a certain amount of pure silver. And only in Michigan is this found, nowhere else in the world. And so Michigan copper almost has a DNA signature. You can track it anywhere. And then that's really, really, really important. So highly sought after. And what we see, the Michigan mines date from about 5300 BC and abruptly ends about 1200 BC. So it peaks around 2300 BC. So if you know your history, it's really peaking around the Bronze Age. And you know, what are our key elements for bronze? It's copper and tin. And 1.5 billion pounds of this copper was removed from these ancient copper mines. And scholars, archaeologists, even mainstream archaeologists, this isn't even fringe archaeologists, are just baffled by where did this copper go? It is just vanished. Now you do have some of this copper found in, you know, Hopewell burials, some in Maine, some as far as California, but this copper that has been found in archaeological sites makes up about 1% of what was taken out of there. So where did it go, right? That's the big question. So we know, now let's jump in, we're going to talk about a few cultures and we'll try to go just a little bit chronologically here. Let me talk about this first. So a historian in the UK, and the reason I highlighted the UK is because the ancient tin capital of the ancient trade world was Cornwall in England. And so Dr. Palvin Jenkins, a historian from Glastonbury, UK, writes, I met a farmer who owns the land on which a megalithic stone circle is, called Mary Maidens, in the far west Cornwall. While clearing hedges, he discovered an arrowhead which was sent to the British Museum for identification. The answer returned 5,000 years old, the source, Michigan. And again, England would be a key, if not destination stop, if you're making bronze, because of the ancient Cornwall in the tin trade there. So there's a plaque also in London's museum that says from about 2500 BC, and that's when we saw the peak of these mines, the peak activity. The use of copper, formerly limited to parts of southeastern Europe, suddenly swept through the rest of the continent. Now there are some ancient copper mining activity in Cyprus, but it's a different kind of copper. It's more of an alloy, an oxide. It's not this float copper or this pure copper. So it swept through Europe and the rest of the country. And then what's interesting is we can start to track it. So let's first talk about the Minoans. These guys were the culture for the Bronze Age. These guys controlled trade, commerce. If you've read about them, they were based in Crete and in Thera, which is Santorini today. And their culture is fascinating. These guys had clay plumbing. They had running water. I mean, just amazing high civilization that they achieved. And they controlled the trade, and particularly the Bronze Age, the trade there. And so this is called the Newberry Tablet, found in 1896 in a little town in Michigan called Newberry. So in here there was a bunch of characters on here. Now in 1896, scholars knew nothing about the Minoans until 1905 by British archaeologists on Crete. And then we learned more about the culture and discovered a lot of their language. A lot of the Minoan language is still a mystery. However, we do know the characters, and this is from that culture. So we have Minoan alphabet here, found in 1896 with, these people could have no idea how to reproduce this. So Dr. Barry Fell, eminent archaeologist, is confirmed that this is Minoan, and I think the translation is still difficult. I'll have to reference his book, but I'm not quite sure what it says. We see other Minoan influence on the Ohio River, the Cavern of Glyphs, it's called. There is some petroglyphs that show Minoan dress, very similar to what's found on Crete. And again, if we line up, the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, I mean, you can get about everywhere east of the Mississippi River. So it would be a key trade route. Minoan artifacts have been found, a pot in Louisiana. So this is interesting. So in excavations throughout the world, Michigan ingots, now when we say ingots, we're just talking about little pieces of actual float copper, pure copper. They have been found in Crete. And remember, how do we know that? Because only Michigan copper is that pure alloy, that pure mix. So it has a DNA signature. Just think of it as DNA. So archaeologist Zen Halpern says that other Michigan copper essentially has been found in archaeological sites in Britain, Sardinia, Cyprus, the Nile Delta, Turkey, Bulgaria, and other places. Now this graphic is from the National Geographic, this picture here, illustration. So there was a shipwreck off the coast of Turkey in Cape Galedonia, and this has Michigan copper in it. And this ship was full of trade goods. It had Egyptian jewelry, Hittite goods, and Michigan copper. And again, the Minoans would have owned that trade. Now, were the Minoans actually mining, or were they just picking up the copper? It's still debated. But I personally think is this still on? This is still on. I personally think the Adena culture was actually doing the mining, but that is debated. But we know other cultures were picking up and trading this copper. And so in Ohio, this was only found about 20 years ago. A guy with a metal detector was going over, it was either a high school football field or just behind it, and it went off and he dug down. I'm sure he wasn't supposed to, but he found these pendants, very Minoan-like. This dress, it's a certain dance that they do, and this double axe symbol was a sacred symbol to the Minoans, and this is a pendant. When you see artifacts like that with a hole, it was usually worn around the neck as a pendant. So this found in Ohio. It was Cleveland area, really close to Kirtland, actually. Okay, so we have the Minoans, and they really, so we have them around 2500 BC. they go through some challenging things. So Thera, which is Santorini, erupts and absolutely destroys half of that civilization. And then it continues to thrive on Crete, even though they suffered major tsunamis and other earthquakes. But around 1200 BC, the Minoans just sort of vanish. They disintegrate. Their society is gone. And so waiting in the wing are the Phoenicians. Now the Phoenicians rise about 1200 BC, and again, very similar to the Minoans, they were tradesmen. But what they were really, really known for, they were expert sailors. And that was their thing. And some of their culture overlapped with the Minoans, where the Minoans would even use Phoenician sailors, and the Egyptians would use Phoenician sailors. The Phoenicians are Canaanites, so they're Semitic, but they, of course, clashed with the ancient cultures in Israel. They were not a fan of Joshua. They actually had some carvings found where they did not like Joshua. And he moved them over to Sidon, which is in Lebanon, and then the Phoenicians spread out across North Africa, and Carthage is a Phoenician city. It's often referred to as just Carthage, but they're Phoenician people. So they had coinage that they would call map coins, and what they would do is, it was pretty brilliant actually. They were sort of advertising everywhere that they had trade or in commerce in the world. And scholars, at the bottom of the coin, you can see that map there, and this is what some scholars, most scholars have interpreted it to be, you know, America, you have Britain there, you have Europe, Africa, Mediterranean, Asia. So essentially, the Phoenicians traded all over the world. Now, when we talk about ancient cultures sailing the seas, right? I'm sure this crowd especially knows that it's debated, right? You have your diffusionists, which are, yes, obviously ancient cultures traded with each other, talked with each other, and you have your isolationists, which are some of your traditional stuck-in-the-mud archaeologists that say, no, everybody was isolated, and different symbols and goods popping up are just coincidences, or the funniest explanations are, you know, you actually find lots of Roman coins all over the eastern United States. Well, some collector, you know, had a whole bag and just dumped them in the Ohio River, right? I mean, they say really odd stuff like this. And they're a dying breed. It's changing, but anyway, that's the poll. That's the contention. So back to the Phoenicians. So this is in Monaghan Island. Anybody familiar with Ogham? So this is ancient Celtic writing. So most of your ancestors here, I imagine, wrote in this. If you guys have some of the same ancestry as I do, I imagine. So here, Barry Fell, in his book, he writes about this in America, BC. So this inscription says, cargo ships from Phoenicia. And again, this is an island just off of Maine. And it's written in Ogham. So either the ancient Celts were writing it here because it was Phoenician port and to leave it alone, or the Phoenicians wrote it in Ogham, so the Celts would leave it alone. We're not quite sure. But it was used in Ogham, and it's essentially a sign that says this is a Phoenician port, you know, leave it alone. So we've got a presence there in Maine. Okay, and this is a really interesting quote I stumbled on in my research. So this is by Dr. James Gillian, former vice president of Yankton College in Illinois. And my dad's family is from Illinois, so I like all Illinois stuff. So he says, a professional team of archaeologists and linguists have made a systematic sweep of the upper Midwest in about 1992, finding conclusive evidence that the Phoenicians had indeed sailed up the Mississippi River on a regular basis. Farmers in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan, while clearing their field, that should be fields, in the 1800s, often found rocks inscribed with odd letters and unknown written languages. Many inscriptions were written in Punic, which of course is Phoenician. So very interesting. I think most scholars acknowledge this, but they just are careful because of the politics in academics, right? Egyptians. These guys were druggies. So I won't talk a lot about the Egyptians, but a German scientist, and I'm going to slaughter this pronunciation, but Sloveta Balabovanova, which sounds more Russian than German, but was studying the remains of Lady Hanut Taudu, a member of, basically an Egyptian princess. And what she finds there are traces of cocaine and nicotine. Again, only native to the Americas. That is not found anywhere else in the world. And so we see it show up in ancient mummies in Egypt. They're pretty sure this was used ceremonially, but you know, who knows? Could be recreational. Corn. Corn is another thing you see all over ancient Egypt. There are murals, carvings, everything. It's native to the Americas. It is not from Egypt or anywhere in the Middle East. It came from the Americas. And you see that all over Egypt. So the Egyptians definitely traded. A lot of scholars think they used the Phoenicians because they were the sailors. But they definitely had American goods. Yeah, there's actually been marijuana that has showed up in mummies too. So these guys were druggies. Hebrews. So Hebrews are the more interesting one because so the Hebrews were not colonizers. They weren't traders. And that really goes back to their theology of a holy land, a promised land. They really didn't go about the world. So it's really puzzling that we see Hebrews showing up, and we see them show up mostly in North America. Very little, if any, in Meso or South America. So there is 8 evidences. There's more, but these are the ones I like. So we talked about the Newark Decalogue stone. This was in Newark. This had the 10 Commandments. We showed it earlier. The Back Creek stone is really interesting. And again, this isn't necessarily related to Michigan, but I'm just showing ancient cultures knew about this area. So the Back Creek stone was found by the Smithsonian Institute, which traditionally is isolationist in doctrine. They are not diffusionists at all. So Smithsonian archaeologists find this. They put it in their museum, the Smithsonian Museum, and they call it Cherokee. Well, it's not till, I don't know, maybe 80 years later, Dr. Cyrus Gordon says, you have this thing upside down. Turn it right side up. It's Old Hebrew. It says, for Judea. That is the bottom one there. For Judea and block Hebrew. So, oops. The Smithsonian can't deny that one, right? They just ignore it. Las Lunas stone, Decalogue stone, has the 10 Commandments in New Mexico. I've never been there. I would love to see it. I have seen the Tucson artifacts, which are really interesting. And you also see Roman artifacts showing up in the Tucson stuff. And then there's a Hebrew petroglyph in New Mexico as well. So something was going on in the Southwest as well. So we start to see these little pockets of ancient culture showing up. Really, really interesting. The Hanukkah or the Hanukkah earthworks, let me show you a picture of that real quick. Again, found by the Smithsonian. Squire and Davis wrote about this. It was actually in the first official publication of the Smithsonian Institute. Obviously, you see a menorah there, and then you see an oil lamp. So sacred symbols to the Hebrews. Unfortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers ordered this destroyed. So this is no longer, this is plowed over, this does not exist. And that's a whole discussion as to why that may have happened. That's a whole other lecture. Read about John Wesley Powell, and you'll start to see where this all connects. Not a good dude. Okay, and then I think I didn't bring my oil lamp. I do have one that dates to about 72 AD, but it's just beautiful, beautiful thing, and it's a tragedy that was destroyed. Okay, so we set the stage with ancient cultures a little bit. I think it's unquestionable that there was contact with the Americas. And it's not all North America, it's Central and South America as well. And the Phoenicians were definitely in Brazil. There is a stone there that is translated. They had a shipwreck there, and they left some markings there. But we're going to go back up to North America and set the stage here for the Michigan artifacts. Okay. Setting the stage here. These are found from 1848 to 1920. These are artifacts with a mixture of languages containing biblical scenes, even some New Testament themes, old world dress, just really unusual things. Most of the languages are cuneiform and Egyptian, and just a mixture of that. So in 1890, so we'll run through the timeline here, and this really kind of tells the story quite well. In 1890, James Scotford reports his first findings, and this is where publicity around it really starts to kind of pick up. People start to really hear about it, although they were found as early as 1848 in Michigan. So in 1907, Daniel Soper, who was a former Secretary of State for Michigan, really respected member of the community, and Reverend James Savage, a clergyman that again had a following of people that really respected, people absolutely loved, adored this man. They began building their own collections. And again, more awareness begins to build around it. Now, on a national scale, you have Bishop Rudolph Eisenhower, who was a missionary of the RLDS Church, and he publishes something. So he publishes a pamphlet called Engravings of Prehistoric Specimens from Michigan, USA. So this puts it on the national map. So now you start to have scholars around the country, scholars back in Boston, New York, that cry foul and start to say that, you know, there's no way these can be real, we need to study these, or, you know, how would this biblical stuff show up? So the controversy really sort of heats up here. And so what they do, I mean, it really was sort of pretty hot in the day. I mean, this was in a lot of the newspapers. So a lot of scholars, what they do is they form a national committee to investigate it here. And so this committee is led by Professor Frederick Starr of the University of Chicago, Roswell Field, great name, of the Chicago Examiner, and Dr. James Talmage, director of the Deseret Museum, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with Talmage. And Talmage, I got to say, so it's really interesting, not quite what you'd think. So Talmage, these made him nervous more than they did excited. So because they were controversial already, Talmage didn't want the Mormon Church associated with them. So he came out with the mindset of kind of disproving them. And it's a little bit hard to understand, but that's the way he was looking at it. It's important to know that background. And then we know during the time some of the brethren were split between it, but he was sort of a traditional academic by trade, and just thought it was too controversial, and it worried him. So let's see, where was I? So what they do is they do some excavations, and this whole committee digs up these mounds and they find lots of artifacts. And so essentially Professor Starr issues a report that says, yeah, we've found tablets and we found effigy pipes, but clearly, you know, these had to have been, you know, put in by sleight of hand while we weren't looking, because there's just no way this can show up. And again, it goes back to the political environment of these academics, right? It could be professional suicide if he had acknowledged them. But what's really interesting, he personally found one of the tablets, and it was wrapped in roots of a tree. The tree was at least 200 years old. They had to cut the roots back. They had to cut them back. And he pulled it out, and he still issued this report, you know, crying foul. So really interesting, but not helpful, obviously. So Talmage, so this committee breaks up, but Talmage is still out here, still interested, still worried about it. So he takes Scotford out and goes out with him. They dig into a mound and they find a tablet. So he says, okay, you know, and he's still skeptical, and he takes out Soper with him as well. They dig into 2 mounds and they find 2 more tablets. Well, he then ventures by himself and explores 22 mounds and doesn't find anything. And so for him, that cements it in his mind, these aren't real. So he goes back, tells Salt Lake, let's just leave these alone. These aren't real. And he even accuses Scotford of forging the artifacts. Now, it simmers a little bit. So we're going to jump up to 1953. So Judge Cloudstone of Peoria, Illinois, asked respected Chicago attorney, author, and scientist Henrietta Mertz to study the collection because he owned several himself and was really interested in it. Now, Henrietta Mertz was awesome. So she was probably the most qualified person in the entire world to study these. She was a code breaker in World War II. She worked for the OSS. Was a code breaker, was trained at PhD in linguistics with a specialty in forgery. I mean, there was no better scholar in the entire world at the time to study these artifacts and to give an opinion on whether they were real or not. So, what does she conclude? She concludes that they are absolutely genuine, without question. And she reports that back to the judge, reports her findings publicly, and then starts a book. And unfortunately, she dies before it's published, but I saw somebody holding it. Somebody have Henrietta's? Oh, it's on the table? Oh, yeah.
Optimistic symbol.
Yeah, so that's her book, and it's published after she dies. But she absolutely believes they are genuine, and she gives her reasons in the whole book. Her theory is that they were Coptic Christians. That came around 325 AD because the Coptics were persecuted by the Roman Church. And that's around the Council of Nicaea, where the Roman Church sort of said, okay, we're going to go with Trinity, we're going to go with whatever else. And they did it ruthlessly. So without getting into that, her theory was that the Coptic Christians fled and came to the Americas. And so that's why there's some New Testament scenes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But okay, now we're going to jump back a little bit, actually, sorry. So in 1960, current LDS Church elders, Bird and Roundy, they meet with Father Charles Sheedy of Notre Dame, and they strike up a friendship. And you know, it's a priest; they're not necessarily trying to teach him, but they strike up a friendship. So Father Sheedy goes and gets these artifacts. So what happens was there was a huge collection that has now become known as the Savage Soper collection. So Father Savage died and he willed it to Notre Dame. That's how it ended up there. Then it went into a basement. You know, the Catholic priests were wary of it too, and they're academics as well. So he thought that these missionaries would be interested in it, so they brought him up and showed the elders. So the elders wrote back to Salt Lake, and at the time, Elder Milton R. Hunter was the church guy, or the history guy for the church. He had written a lot of history that we'd talked about before, so he was the go-to guy. So the church leaders, LDS church leaders, send out Elder Milton R. Hunter, and he is excited about them, loves them, and Father Sheedy says, okay, they're yours, just take them. And at this time, there were about 800 pieces. You know, the collection had dwindled, and pieces were broken, and some really nice pieces actually were broken. But anyway, there's about 800 pieces, and he ships them back to Salt Lake. So now they end up in the church museum, but really it's the warehouse. So the church is still, the LDS Church, trying to be non-denominational here, sorry for some vocabulary if I slip into. So the LDS Church was still a little weary about them. My grandfather believed, after studying them for years, so he then studies them for the next, till 1973, believes without a doubt that they're authentic. He actually begins a manuscript about them in 1973. Unfortunately, he starts to get sick, and then in 1974 he donates the collection or wills it to the LDS Church, and in 75 he passes away. So in the meantime, they are in the church museum, the LDS Church Museum warehouse in Salt Lake City, just kind of in a dark room, not getting a lot of love. So, and people like in the interim, people like Wayne May have studied them, and others, and the church has let people have access to them and so forth. And there's been some things written on them, but they sort of were just wasting away in the dark. So, in 2000, the church notified our family about the possible donation to Michigan, because Michigan archaeologists from the University of Michigan had said they wanted to study it. And, let's get it out of the warehouse and let's have our scholars look at it. So this, so the church informed us of this, and they did say, and by the way, no legal action can stop us from doing this, but we're just, we're giving you a heads up, we're telling you. But, they were nice about it, of course, and our family consents to it. Now, if you consider what's going on here, so they're sitting in a dark warehouse for decades, right? And if the church tells my family that scholars are going to want to study it, of course, right? That's what you're going to do, right? I mean, that makes total sense. So family consents, but before the church, the LDS church, donates them to Michigan, there is a professor by the name of Richard Stamps, who was a member of the LDS church, and he wrote a paper called Tools Leave Marks, Material Analysis of the Scotford Soper Savage Michigan Relics. It essentially, I'll just summarize. So he essentially says that a lot of these tablets had metal tools used when they were carved, and we got to throw them out because of that. Now, it's interesting because tools were found, but it doesn't matter. And again, it goes back to this political environment with academics, but that was the stamp of death, if you will. So after that came out, because he was a member of the LDS church, that was the final nail in the coffin. So the church then donated it to the University of Michigan, or the Michigan State, and then it goes into the museum there. So let's skip it and go here. Michigan State. Sorry, I always get that confused. So immediately, the Michigan Historical Museum, which is the museum there on campus, puts up their artifacts under display of archaeological frauds. So obviously my family was really upset about it. And we don't know really what happened, and it's really, really important not to put any blame on anybody. The church may have not known they're going to do that. They may have, who knows. But it's pointless to put any blame on it. The family thought it was the best thing to do because scholars were going to study it, but it turns out to be really, really unfortunate. So they put them up as frauds. They run a exhibit for a while, and then they put it in a dark warehouse. So, fast years go by, blah blah blah. There's activists around it like Wayne May and stuff that are just we're trying to get them back, and my aunt there in the back, Linda Hunter, but it's done, right? Legally, it's done. So in 2014, this became sort of a personal mission of mine, and I was sure as heck going to try. So what I did is I arranged a meeting. This was last June or June 2014, with the head archaeologist Eric Perkins that was in charge of the collection in the Michigan Museum. He said, "Sure, come on out." I hooked up with Ryan there at Nephite Explorer. We're gonna, I'm the PR guy, right? Let's get a little bit of coverage around this. And so we went out, and me and Ryan Fisher, and they were really nice. They rolled out the red carpet. They set up photography lights. They had tables of the collection out, and Eric spent 4 hours with us. I mean, I cannot say a bad thing about him. And we had these sort of, Ryan would interview him sort of in a journalist perspective, and then I would ask questions here and there. And so we had a lot of discussions with him, and of course he wasn't a believer, and he knew we were, I'm sure, but he was very tactful. And so essentially, a few things he kept coming back to is, we just don't know what to do with these. There's a mixture of languages and cultures, and there's cuneiform and Egyptian. They just don't fall anywhere, and we just don't know what to do with them. That was funny, but that was the thing he kept coming back with. And he knew at one point. So I had Ryan wandered off for a minute, and I had him alone. I said, you know what I'm going to ask, right? And Eric's like, yeah, I know what you're going to ask. you know, the family would love to get these back. We didn't know they were going to be displayed this way. Is there anything we can do? And he said, no, there's nothing we can do legally. This isn't uncommon for, you know, one generation to donate something and then the next generation wanted it back. And there's laws that are put in place because this happens a lot. So I said, well, look, there's a lot of wealthy members of the LDS Church that are willing to donate a lot of money to get these back. I mean, we're talking millions. And he said that legally I can't. Once they are donated, it becomes the property of the people of Michigan. So I made my case. There's just nothing we can do unless some brilliant legal mind, you know, figures out some maneuver. But as of now, that's what the law says. So he promised Ryan and I that anybody that wanted to go see this collection, that he would get them out. And I know a couple people that have done it, and he's kept his promise. So the strategy right now is let's just overwhelm them with requests, right? So let's at least get it out of the warehouse and get it to where they'll put at least a permanent display. Let's get the Michigan members to know about it, not just members of the church, I'm sorry. I mean, anybody interested in this from Michigan, let's get them to know. A lot of people just don't know about that. So there is, and I can give it to you after as well, but there's his contact info. If you're ever in Michigan, in Lansing, go see him. So that's all I got right now. Is we just got to overwhelm them with requests. So you can write that down, or just come see me after, and I'll give that to you. Very nice gentlemen. They're very cordial. So let's do it. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about. Yeah. Sorry. You bet. It's Perkins E at Michigan.gov. 517-373-3559. I can give that to you too when you come up afterward. So what makes the Michigan artifacts really interesting is the mystic symbol, and that's what Henrietta Mertz titled her book. This is from Wayne May, who has studied this a lot. He says the mystic symbol is written in a script known as cuneiform, which is common throughout the Middle East. This symbol has been found in many North American states such as Maine, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Utah. A Native American of Minnesota identified this symbol as the name for the Creator's son, Yod-Heh-Vah, and that's phonetic. So Yod-Heh-Vah, which of course is very close to Jehovah or Yahweh. And that is that symbol there in the middle there, in cuneiform, looks like a bunch of sticks. So David Dill is another researcher that has spent decades studying the Michigan artifacts. So he believes, so you see a lot, those two symbols circled, and he interpreted these as a form of actually cuneiform and Hebrew, sort of a mixture, meaning sun on the right hand and sun on the left hand. And this really refers to the two gods, right? The dark god and the good god. And you see this throughout these artifacts. You can kind of see it there, sun on the left hand and sun on the right hand. And then why so this is the big reason why Henrietta Mertz believed that they were Coptic Christians. So, and David Dill did as well. So the Coptics believed that Lucifer or Satan and Christ were brothers, descended from a God, a heavenly Father. And so only Coptic Christians believe that, according to these folks, right? I mean, members of the LDS Church also believe it, but what they concluded was these had to have been Coptics at the time, because there's nobody else has this doctrine. No other sect has this. No other tradition has this except for the Coptics, and the LDS folks have it as well. But so you see this all over. But that is really the main. And then some of the symbology is Coptic oriented. We get the bird a lot there, a crow type figure. The rooster shows up a lot. So it really seems like there is some influence from that. Again, that's just their That's just their guess, but that's kind of what they both concluded. And if you read her book, she'll talk a lot about that. This is some pictures I took. Ryan took a lot better pictures. So I apologize, I'm not a photographer. I'm not even an average one. But this gives you an idea of what they did. They laid them out on the table, and there were several tables like this. And it's always front and back. So we'd go and turn over the tablets. And you see here, it's a mixture of languages, right? They just can't interpret it, and so scholars have a big problem with that. Here's one that has a lot of Egyptian influence, even possibly some African influence. Again, Egyptian clothing. This would be ceremonial because it wasn't that big, but you see the mystic symbol there in the middle. And there is a lot of calendar stones, and some of these were 5 feet long. I mean, these are massive. So you see the mystic symbol there all over the place. Lots of lunar alignments, different calendar stones. We'll talk about one of the calendar stones in a minute. Again, this dress is very Middle Eastern, very Phoenician. And then also the hat is very Egyptian. So again, sort of a mixture of cultures. Let me jump to, oops, I was going up. Okay, so essentially, I mean, these are just really high-level points, right? There's a lot more details, but so the supporters say, look, we have artifacts found in 27 different Michigan counties. This isn't in here, but it's over, over a 100-year period of time. Anywhere from 10 to 30,000 artifacts were found. I know that's a big range there, but thousands of artifacts found. The slate, we know, is from the Quinoa Peninsula, so several hundred miles away. Copper is from Isle Royale. And then, 7 different states. So good luck faking something like this, right? Daniel Soper said it best there. One of the people was really accused of it. He says, I personally have knowledge of more than 3,000 articles that have been found. And if they are pure and were buried to be found, whoever buried them has been a very busy person, because they have been found throughout the state by hundreds of different people. And again, over like a 120-year period. So really, I mean, it would be impossible to fake that. Now, this is another interesting thing, and I'm not an astronomer, I'm not necessarily an astronomist, but so this is really interesting. So this is a calendar stone, and David Deal writes a lot about this. So you can go back and get astronomical records because you can align asteroids and eclipses. And so what this is, it's a tablet found in 1896, and it essentially points to the calendar, the July sector. And so during this time, this also shows a lunar eclipse and a certain meteor shower. And so if you follow the calendar, this correlates to the Delta Aquaroid meteor shower that happened about 325 AD. And so, people studying, the stars are able to do this with different records. So this essentially is what would have happened if it passed over Michigan about 325 AD, and this is what they would have seen. Because you have a certain lunar alignment with a certain meteor shower in a certain month. And the last time that had that over the area of Michigan would have been 325 AD. So really, really interesting, and David Dill concludes that this single artifact has proven the time, or at least a moment in time, that the Coptic Christians were there. And remember, that was his conclusion, that the Coptics were there. There's lots of different, this is just one example of the calendar stones. There's lots of different stones here that point to unusual happenings in the heavens that can be correlated to certain time periods. And again, I wish I could explain that a little better, but it's fascinating. So, my grandfather, Milton R. Hunter, says, so he was communicating with Daniel Soper's son. Ellis Clark Soper, and they were exchanging letters. And at the end of the letter, this is what my grandfather wrote back. He said, also, the fact that many people have proclaimed that both Father Savage and your father's collections are frauds or forgeries makes your and my problem much more complicated. As you know, I personally, however, feel that the artifacts are all genuine. And he was not a dumb guy. He was a PhD and spent his entire career studying ancient cultures and religion. Detractors. So let's go back let's see what they say. So we've talked about the metal, the tool marks. So supporters will say, yeah, but there's copper tools that are found. And then the detractors say, yeah, but they were found later once there were criticisms that come up. Well, we've searched the records, and actually there are copper tools, carving tools found early, so 1850s, so really early on. So suggesting that they were introduced later on to cover up this criticism, it doesn't hold up. And by the way, we're finding a lot of evidence that ancient cultures used types of metal for carvings. I mean, go look at the Egyptian pyramids, Tiwanaku in Peru. They're cut so precisely you can't put a sheet of paper between them. So unfired clay, this is another big criticism. So some of the pieces were unfired clay, just natural clay. And so critics say, well, look, these cannot survive in a climate like Michigan. It's wet. They're going to dissolve. So Wayne May had a piece of this actual unfired clay from the collection. He stuck it in a container of water for a year, I think at least a year, pulled it out, no deterioration at all. Nothing happened to it. So we really think that these would hold up. This type of clay is going to hold up. So a mixture of languages, well, who here speaks English? What's that mixed with? It's got Saxon, Pict, Britain. I mean, it's a mess of languages. So if we have cultures here that have overlapping cultures for 2,000 years in the Americas, and it's mixed with different cultures, that's what would happen. I mean, that's what we'd expect to find. Sheet copper, I think, so here's where this gets really complicated. There is some suspect pieces, particularly the sheet copper. The ancients just didn't do sheet copper. So even supporters think that, yeah, there may have been some fakes that were included in here, and the sheet copper ones are particularly suspect. So this is what's really unfortunate, because if there are fakes, tossed into some of these collections, it's like poisoning a well, right? That nobody's going to drink at it, or no scholar is going to drink at it. And once it gets messy, they're just not going to touch it, and that's what's really, really unfortunate. But to cast aside the whole collection and all these artifacts as fakes just because a couple have been, are suspect is ridiculous, really, and not scientific. But that's what we see. That's what we see happening. But those are the main criticisms there. Okay. Any questions on the Michigan artifacts? Yeah.
Would you say that also they would question them because of the fact of the nature of the people who lived here before? That there's that argument that people who lived before us were actually intelligent and knew how to work tools and knew how to do those things.
The folks in the 1800s?
Yeah, because they still live off that narrative that everybody before Columbus were savages. That also will say, oh, well, those tool marks couldn't be real because these people who lived before were savages. So where did those tools come from?
Yeah, exactly. So exactly. So the traditional isolationist doctrine of the Native Americans is that they were savage-like and did not have any high technology, high math, anything like that. And we can talk about the reasons why. Again, it's a whole nother lecture, but it goes back to Manifest Destiny and John Wesley Powell and the Smithsonian Institute. But as America was moving west, we had to make, so the government had to make it appear that there weren't any highly advanced cultures, right? Otherwise you can't justify moving westward. And the Smithsonian Institute was really, really involved in this, and that's part of why you see some structures that were torn down by government things. So manifest destiny is a big reason why the scholars would say that, you know, these ancient people just weren't capable of this. Yeah, sorry, we'll just move across the room. In the back?
Well, curious, they talk about the mystic symbol and supposedly they translated that. How much of the language has actually been translated, did they feel? Surely there's more than just coming up with one symbol and say, okay, this says God, therefore we've got people coming over that are Christian or something. They must have translated more than that. And typically, from what I understand by study and so forth, is that one of the ways they determine frauds is they go back and find that they copied symbols from somewhere else.
Dictionaries and stuff.
Copies. If we've got 10 to 30,000 of these things with symbols all over, have they ever found anything other than this collection where they may have copied something, or they think they totally invented a language?
Yeah, really good question. So a lot of the artifacts there's not writing on a lot of them. A lot of them are graphical. But some of the cuneiform, of course, expressions have been translated. The Egyptian ones particularly don't make any sense, at least to scholars. It's like having A, F, just random letters. So translations with anything Egyptian doesn't really work, doesn't really make sense. So there's not a ton of cuneiform. I don't know of any pure phrases that have been translated beyond that. Sorry, we may know more about that, but I don't think so. Sorry, in the back, I'll come back to you, Adidas. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you talked about the DNA of the copper. So the artifacts, if it came from the Michigan copper that came from those copper fields, I would probably think that people in the 1800s probably didn't have, I don't know, for me, even though I live in Salt Lake or Provo or wherever, for me to go and get copper from Michigan to be able to make the frauds would not be that necessarily easy unless I was a person that was already in archaeology trying to
Exactly.
So for me to go and get the copper, make it original. So on these artifacts, are they the Michigan copper? Do they have the DNA that matches that?
Yeah, most of it is from the Isle Royale. So it's at least 90 to 100 miles away, so it would have been really difficult. And the slate is from the Quinoa Peninsula, so it's that part of Wisconsin that juts into Lake Superior. So it would have been extremely difficult to do that. Not impossible, but very unlikely.
Even go farther, when did they find out that certain copper could be traced to where it came from? So if before these were discovered, if that wasn't the case, it was discovered 20, 30 years after, you can trace where the copper is. Those people could say, well, all I have to do is have copper to make these forgeries. And so they didn't even know that they had to match the same copper.
Yeah, some of the copper isn't. Some of the copper does seem to be modern sheet metal. So that's where the some is suspect, but a lot of it is that native copper from up there. But critics will say, okay, yeah, I mean, that may have taken months and months, but it's possible. They could have gone up there and got native copper. Very unlikely, but I don't think it's definitive proof.
So do they have a lot of other artifacts in other places besides Michigan's?
Yeah. Remember some slides back, we found it in Turkey, we found it in Britain, all over the Middle East. I have two pieces from here. I'll show you guys. This is from Ohio, and this up here, we'll talk about these in a minute. That one is from Michigan. But do you remember the shipwreck and that stuff? That was off the coast of Turkey. So this Michigan copper is found all over the ancient world, and it's not found in a modern way. These are found in archaeological sites. I mean, sure, you can still go and get the copper there. There's that much. I mean, the Isle Royale is an island of copper. Literally, that thing is pretty much made of copper. So you could go today, chip some piece off, and go throw it in Turkey. but these are found in ancient settings. These are shipwrecks or 20 feet down in the ground in archaeological ruins. Adidas.
So I've probably heard how the Dead Sea Scrolls have had high-resolution photos taken and it's displayed completely online. You can view them.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of display of these artifacts online with professionally done photos?
Yeah, good question. There are. So you subscribe to Ancient American Magazine, has a lot of them. Random websites have them. Ryan Fisher has a lot of them. Let's ask him after what he plans to do with them. I think he's going to do a lot. Yeah, they're out there for sure. Come find me after, and I can give you some good sources. And then buy her book too. I don't think it's in color, but she has a lot of pictures there. Henrietta Mertz's book. It's a good read. It's a really good read. Yeah.
They carbon dated the slate, and I've also read where other families back in that area have unearthed things over the years, and that nobody takes them seriously because of Michigan artifacts.
Yeah, this axe head came from a family that was in the family for 200 years. You can't carbon date organic material, so you can't date it, unfortunately. But really,
I don't know if they took the clay and made slate, and if anything could have been in there that could have been carbon dated.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's a really good question though, because potentially there could be some organic matter in clay, right? But I don't think enough to carbon date it. That's a really good question though. Yeah.
Is there any pressure from Native American groups or some Native Americans to not validate people being there before them?
There are some, but it's interesting. A lot of the native traditions say that it wasn't them. I'm trying to remember the tribe there, but they say it wasn't them. Some of them talk about a light-skinned race coming and taking them away. I think there are some Native American activists that really say it was us. But if you look in their traditions, or oral traditions, and in history, they say it wasn't them. I mean, the mound builders, all the Algonquin group of tribes, right, and back east say that we didn't build the mounds. And that's in the oral traditions. Now you may have some activists today that said, yeah, we did. I mean, we did. So you would find that. But if you go study their traditions and what some of the early settlers, what they said to the early settlers, and when they were interviewed and sourced, they say they didn't do it. They weren't responsible for it. And so the Adena, if it was the Adena, they died out, right? There's not much of a remnant of the Adena. And they're a really mysterious group too, because all the skeletons they find of the Adena are huge. They're massive people.
What size, what height?
I think there's some that are 7, 8 feet tall. And those are select finds and mounds, so we don't know exactly what they all look like, but some of them are huge, and there's some books written on that, but they definitely were larger people. Yeah.
Well, supposedly, like the Hopewell and stuff, if they died out about, they say that the Hopewell kind of ended around 400 AD. So if that's when they ended, the Native Americans that are left, do they match the same DNA? And have they tested the DNA? I know there was some stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course, in Ohio, they tested it and then changed their mind about what she said.
Yeah, great question. They do, actually. So haplogroup X is found in the Middle East. And all the Algonquin tribes, I always struggle with that word, but all the northeastern tribes have that haplogroup X. It originates in the Middle East. It actually, the Druze have it today, which are not, they're related to the Jews, but they're not quite Arab. And then it's found among Jews, and it really originates, they can pinpoint the Sea of Galilee, actually, is exactly where that haplogroup X comes from. So, Mesoamericans, Mayans, no, it's Asian DNA. But American Indian tribes in the Northeast, absolutely, it's found there. And in the Hopewell skeletons that they have been able to carbon date, same DNA. The Adena are different. I mean, their skulls, you could wear it like a helmet. And there's a lot of books that compare the skulls with the Hopewell and the Adena. They were just a different group. They were probably related to the Bell Potter group, the group that was in Britain. They were large scale as well. But again, it's a little speculative. We don't know. I don't know. The Adena are really mysterious. But if you see some of the, they made the tubular pipes usually, and the Adena mounds are conical, just like the Miamisburg one, and the Hopewell mounds are totally different. There's evidence that the Hopewell may have taken over some of the Adena structures. There's some scholars think that, which would make sense, right? You'd have some overlapping of cultures. But good question about the DNA. Yes, that is found in the northeastern United States. Yeah.
At this time, is there any institute or more of an official body, whether it's a university or so forth, that's trying to look at, rather than looking at the collection as a whole, looking at individual pieces and trying to authenticate or disprove piece by piece rather than the entire collection?
The Michigan.
Studying actively, saying going to look at this group or this specimen rather than looking at the entire collection, saying let's authenticate the collection rather than just piece by piece.
Good question. You mean the Michigan artifacts in particular, right? No, not really. So there's a lot of researchers that are, for sure. There's lots of books about them, lots of supporters. David Dill, who I'd mentioned, has written a lot of books. Cyrus Gordon is a PhD that has, yeah, were you saying something? Oh. Yeah, so there are, but they're considered a little renegade, a little bit maverick, the scholars that do that. I mean, institutions are careful. Particularly archaeology, if anything is messy or gets labeled fraud, they just don't want to touch it. So the scholars that do, they're usually a little renegade, a little more maverick.
What about?
But yeah, there are.
What about active digs in sites in that area? Is there any active studies of the sites? Are there any current artifacts that are coming to light that maybe could be considered more possibly authentic because of where they're being discovered, or how they're being, who's finding them, individuals?
Yeah, there are. You can find, there's rock hammers that are found up there all the time, arrowheads, axe heads, no copper books, unfortunately. Lots of really interesting carvings on walls. There's stuff found all the time. Even in the Midwest, there's still Hopewell digs going on. We were back in Illinois recently. If you know Wayne May, he's actually overseeing one on the Mississippi River. So yeah, there is excavations going on all the time, absolutely. Yeah?
You said that the artifacts were scattered over 30 counties. I'm wondering where the hot spots were, and if those hot spots correlate with the places where the ancient settlers would have found the topography of the land or the natural resources conducive.
Yeah, really good question. 27 counties. So it's essentially Detroit. So it's Detroit suburbs, which Detroit is a mess now, right? So it's mostly built over. There's some mound complexes that are preserved. There's some in Grand Rapids. But when Ryan and I were out in Michigan, we were just trying to find anything that was left, and it's just built over. There's just not much. I mean, literally, the hot spots were Detroit. And Lake St. Clair there, too, would have been a real hot spot. That's right on Detroit, in between there and then the Great Lakes. I mean, it'd be a perfect place to live, but it's just, it's cement. Good question, though.
Talking about mavericks and so forth, trying to determine if something's fraud or not. There's a book written, which I have. I can't tell you the name of it off the top of my head. It's been years since I've read it. But they took collections from all over the world, major collections, and then they sent them to numerous universities, the ones that specialized in specific things. Like somebody, you mentioned, about the only thing they've done to say this is fraud is saying it was made with some kind of a metal tool. Well, nearly anything that comes out worldwide that's found that they feel is important, they send to Egypt for specific things. They send all over to these different universities, look at it with electron microscopes and so forth, and they determine whether the tools enter the the lettering correctly and exit correctly. One university will. Another will determine whether it was a metal tool or something else. If there's metals involved, they'll do spectral analysis and they'll determine, they can tell you the mill it came from for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
The exact mill in the world and so forth. The book goes through a whole bunch of specific finds, not so for savage, but other important finds, a whole series of them that tells you what they are. They went out to each one for about 10 different tests to determine whether they were fraud or authentic. In every single case, half the people determine absolutely they're real and the other half absolutely they're fraud in every case. And so I'm wondering how they can come up with one thing, say if it's done by a metal tool, therefore they're fraud, when everything that's been found basically in the history, in the known history in the last couple hundred years, they run through a whole series of tests and all the scientists disagree with each other.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And particularly the study that Dr. Stamps did, I think he only examined a handful. He didn't even look at it. So it's not very scientific, right? And scholars don't agree. And the field of archaeology right now is a mess. There's just disagreement, and the diffusionists are gaining ground. And you got researchers and scholars like Graham Hancock, folks like that are redating the pyramids and the Sphinx, and everything is shifting. Tiwanaku, anybody heard of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey? They're scholars, and these are traditional archaeologists now, are dating it to 10,000 BC. And this is sophisticated building, so then you have to rethink the whole biblical timeline, right? So the archaeological field right now is it's an interesting time. It's really in flux.
It's not just right now, though, and a lot of us refer to it as a government cover-up in archaeology, just like you talk about Adina. If you go over to Nevada now to
Lovelock Caves.
Yeah, Lovelock Caves. Yeah. That just talking in Minnesota where they used to having the cases, the giants and the skulls and that. Now they'll tell you that they can't even talk about it. The federal government's come in and told them they'll shut them down, throw them all in jail. And then if you keep arguing with them, their story will change constantly. We did this just a couple years ago. And then in the end, they finally give you a one-page printout that the government's told them to give to you that tells how it's all a figment of somebody's imagination. Even though I've got drawers of photographs from different people, all these things. And so you can go through all kinds of things like that. And it's like you talked about, it's a different discussion with Pal and so forth. But if it doesn't fit their little notebook or whatever, this is what everything has to be, history of the United States, then it's fraud or it doesn't exist. Don't you feel like maybe that's more of the reason why nobody's following up? Because universities can't.
They lose funding, yeah.
Mavericks you're talking about, they'll be put right out of business, or the instructors will be fired.
Yeah, every archaeological dig is a grant, right? And so they're absolutely terrified of losing funding. That's a really good point. One thing I'll say about John Wesley Powell, and you guys read about him, you'll cringe every time you drive past Lake Powell, just that he is named after it. But he hated anything particularly about Lost Tribes of Israel. That was he absolutely hated that. So his father was a preacher, of all places, in Palmyra, New York. And his flock was taken by Joseph Smith's early followers. And so he absolutely hated anything associated with Mormonism. And part of the reason why Utah has so much federal land, 70%, I think, is part of the strategy that he came up with and he brought back to Washington. So this is not a good guy, particularly for folks out here. And we name a lake after him. It's awful. Yeah.
When he was the head of the archaeology department and said, don't give any more land away until I can control it. He was more almost like a socialist.
Yeah.
He wanted to have the government control all the water rights and all the land rights, and he did. All the western, all the intermountain states, most of the land is owned by the federal government.
Yep. And he's the main guy behind that. Interesting character.
He does have, though, in the journals of the people traveling with him, talking about pyramid cities here in Utah, and that no longer exists. And so You can go to some of their documentation and find that we did have pyramids down south. We had them up here above the Great Salt Lake. There was an entire city with pyramids and so forth. And his group documented some of those, and we can find out. Right? So.
I'll have to come talk to you about that afterward. I know there's some interesting things in Ogden Canyon and Layton area, right? Yeah, I live up there now, so I'll have to come find you after.
Do you have contact information?
Yeah, I probably have my business card, but if not, I think I should have. Yeah, I'll give it to you after for sure. I've got my business card, I think. Yeah. You guys want to talk about artifact collecting for a minute? We have about a half hour left. Yeah.
Do you get grants to do all this studying and finding, or
do I?
you get paid for selling
No.
articles? How does it work for you and your family?
Oh, nothing. It's just a hobby. I don't get anything. No, nothing financial.
Who pays for your meals?
I pay for my meals. I live here. I mean, this wasn't a big deal, but no, this is just a hobby. Yeah. I had that debate in college, right, to study history or to not, and you know, I was discouraged.
I didn't mean to make you blush, but you did.
I blushed easy. Okay, artifact collecting. Okay, so you got to be careful with artifact collecting. You can spend a lot of money on some silly stuff, and you can even get in trouble in some stuff you buy, particularly with Native American items. So anything ceremonial, anything with an endangered animal. If you have say a Navajo artifact with an eagle feather, which isn't unheard of, you can find those. You can go to jail for a long time. So you got to be really careful, particularly the southeastern cultures, Navajo and Anasazi pots and things. So you got to be really careful with who you buy from. If things are found on private land, you're usually fine if they're passed down through families. If there is paperwork that says they were legally acquired, then you're okay. But just be really careful. Be careful with people online. That's not to say you can't find good antique dealers. So the people that are going to sell you artifacts are collectors themselves or professional antique dealers. So be careful of eBay. There is some real stuff on eBay, but if you've got somebody, research the heck out of them. So let me give you an example. There's one guy, and I can set you up with him, but his name is Salvador Trento, and he's an Oxford scholar. He's written several books, and he is an antique dealer as well. And so I bought several artifacts from him because I trust him, but I spent a lot of time researching and talking to them. So you got to be really careful. That's the number one note of caution there. Try to get paperwork if you can, or at least good provenance, at least where this artifact has been, right? So I'll readily admit there's some pieces I bought that, who knows, but I thought they were cool and I didn't care that much, right? So there's some I know for sure that are genuine, and I bought a lot of these, and some I bought from actual like antique, like Christie's, places like that, real antique galleries. What else did I not mention here? So those are the cautions. Let me show you some of the stuff I brought here. So this is a Hopewell pipe found in Illinois. Anybody familiar with the Naples Mound in Illinois, in Pike County? Anybody know the Zelf story? Okay, so the top X right there is where Zelf's Mound is. The bottom X is where this is from. It's only a few acres away. So because of my religious tradition, I was really interested in this one. So I acquired this, and also my family is from Illinois. So this is one of my favorites, and it's right here. And afterward, you can come up and look at it. But the Hopewell, we're not 100% sure what the effigy pipes were used for. Probably somewhat ceremonial, but frankly, we don't even know really who the Hopewell people are. So Some of that stuff's, you know, a little safer. That's the effigy pipe there again, the eagle, and it's right here. This is interesting. So this is the provenance of this, found in the 1800s in Louisiana. A farmer on his own land uncovered a whole cache. And so the dealer here said, you know, of course, Native Americans don't have facial hair. So the dealer here thought this originated from when Henry de Soto's army, led by Louis de Musoko, penetrated the interior of the southeastern United States. In other words, he thought this was with the Spaniards, and they were depicting the Spaniards. He could be right, or this could date a lot earlier. It is a pipe. It's got a hole in the bottom, and I did bring this as well. It could date to a lot earlier with a different, you know, Caucasian group here in the ancient Americas. Who knows? But I thought that was pretty cool, and it was a trusted source. This right here, if you can see it standing up, this is Michigan copper. This is native copper. And this was found close to the Snake Mound. Anybody been there in Ohio? So this was found about a mile away. Again, on private land. Really, really cool. Come look at this. But it originates from Michigan. It's a coiled snake that's carved around it. The dealer didn't know what it is. It could be some sort of ceremonial stake. I just didn't know, but I thought it was really cool. So come check that out. This is from Ohio. What was unique about this, it's an owl, but it has a human face on the base. This had a professional repair on it too, that you can barely see, that just the repair would have cost about $300. So what this guy was pricing it at, I mean, it was a deal. I felt really good about it. This, you know, of course, didn't have paperwork, but just from the provenance this had, I was comfortable with it. But again, some of this you're just making a call, right? You know, I can't guarantee, I can't prove that to you. But somebody had spent $300 repairing the base, and it had good provenance from where it came from. Oh, Provence, however you want to. There's a side view of the guy. Okay, this is from Isle Royale. So, Michigan copper, native copper, and you're welcome to even, you know, come hold it. So it was found by the Hoffman family in the 1840s and just passed down through the family. The dealer said here, an axe head like this, of pure copper up from the Michigan surfaces about every century or so. So I was really excited about this and inquired it. And again, it's right there. Come take a peek. This is an axe head which did have paperwork, so of course there was no question of legitimacy. It's Edina. The scholar here dated it to about 800 BC for whatever reason. Sometimes with the patina or the rock aging, you can make a guess at the dating. But this is huge. It's right here. I mean, come lift it. This would have been a big Indian. This thing is massive. Yeah.
Some of the things that Wayne Hayes put out, that the Hopewell, their axe heads were smaller than the Edina. The Edina were about twice that size.
Yeah, exactly. So the Edina were, I mean, there's lots of evidence that they were just a larger people. And the Beaker people of England, there's evidence that they were too. So a lot of people, and I think Wayne does too, believes that they came over. They built a lot of this, you know, Stonehenge and things like that, and came over and built some of this. It's just a theory, but there's some ties there. But yeah, that thing is huge. This is just a pipe found on private land. This one's hard to date. The Edina did tubular ones, but the historic Indians did ones like this too. So that one on the left is hard to date. I didn't bring these arrowheads, but these are from farms in Michigan and Ohio. But I've lived in Ohio, obviously, too, so I was interested in collecting some of these, and they're in a case at home. There's a little bone piece. You can see there's a pendant that was broken. The hole is broken through. Some tools, a paint pot, little paint pot there, where they would have ground whatever berries to make whatever dye. That's that pipe again. That's hard to date. That could be historic Indian. It could be older. This is interesting. This is Mississippian. Really good Provence, trusted source. It's some sort of pot. It's right here. The Mississippian culture, they came after the Hopewell. So they picked up around 600 AD and went to clear into the Cahokia time frame, about 1000, 1100 AD. So they were a little bit later. You see a little bit more, some creepier stuff kind of from some of these artifacts. And they tend to be, they start to get a little closer to the Mesoamerican cultures. They start to have some similarity. So that's interesting too. This I bought from a guy that had found this on his land. He lived right on the Kalamazoo River in Michigan, and he pulled this out of the riverbank. So there was a lot of rain and flooding, and he went to the riverbank, and this was just sticking out several feet down on the side of the bank. So child's toy, I don't know what it was. It's the rear end of some sort of animal. I didn't bring that. I should have brought that. I didn't, sorry. There's some that are here, obviously, that I don't have slides. I didn't bring this. This is archaic knife. This one's really cool. Anybody like Da Vinci Code? I, of course, don't believe everything there, but this is from the Moravian dynasty. I bought this from a gallery like Christie's. This is one of the most expensive things I've ever bought. It still has the original dirt on it, but so they called these line of kings the sorcerer kings because they were known for healing by the touch of hand and other miracles. Lots of mythology, lots of legends associated with them. Maybe Christ's bloodline came through those kings, maybe not, who knows, but it's an interesting dynasty. That's a bone, that's from a bone, and it's right up here, so that's one of my favorite pieces. This is a royal medieval, this is from medieval France, a royal figure. It's not that old. It's probably about 1400 AD, but still pretty cool. I do love Mesoamerican cultures, particularly the Olmec. The Olmec are fascinating. So my theory with the Olmec it was just a melting pot of trading cultures. So you have, look at the jade masks there. If you saw that isolated by its own, what would you say that culture that's from? Very Chinese, right? The guy up in the left, very African, or just a mixture. So, and then you have some Hebrew and Phoenician carvings. There's a carving in one of the Olmec sites called Uncle Sam, where, this guy is Caucasian. So the Olmecs were just a mixture of about 1200 BC of just different cultures. And then I think they went to Poverty Point a lot, which is an ancient site at the mouth of the Mississippi River in Louisiana. And of course, up the Mississippi to get Michigan copper, right? But anyway, the Olmecs are very interesting, without question, Chinese influence, and then some other cultures. What do I have from the Olmecs? This little boy is there. Is that all I brought? Oh, and then this African/Asian guy right here on the end, on the top left there. That was from an estate sale of an archaeologist that taught at the University of Arizona. He died and his family sold a lot of pieces. So that's where those two come from, an archaeologist that was specialized in Mesoamerica. I meant to bring this, I didn't, but this is dates to the time of Christ. It's an oil lamp. These are not that hard to get. You can buy these for a couple $100. Yeah. This is mine. Again, this was from a scholar. It was a husband and wife scholar from Wesleyan University who passed away, and the daughter was selling some pieces. So I bought this from the daughter. Her parents brought it back from Mexico. Clearly Mayan, some sort of vassal used for something. Who knows? And that's right here. So you can come take a look at that. This is really cool. This is a whistle. So it's Mayan. Let me see if I can even do this. This is from one of my favorite antique dealers I buy stuff from. So this is about at least 2,000 years old, and hey, works. So Mayan whistle there. This is from Cahokia. So in a family for a long time, and you see at the bottom, and this is here. This is by the Mongrovian dynasty gal. You see that figure in a lot of the Cahokia stuff, that bird, kind of birdman figure, if you're familiar with it. Then the cross thing. So I had to get that one when I first saw. Pretty cool stuff, and we just came from Cahokia. So that's right there. This is one of my favorites. This was from a Hopewell site in Ross County, which is full of Hopewell activity in Ohio. I served in Ross County. It is gorgeous. It's just a gorgeous little bird, and I'm sure I brought that. What's that?
It's supposed to say down weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Did I bring it? Did I not bring that one? Oh, I did, yeah. So come look at that here. They could even, this has a lot of patina that you can date it as well. So it's behind the Egyptian head here. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's just gorgeous. This again is from that Oxford scholar I was telling you about. This is from Southern Illinois. It's turtle, effigy pipe. Really cool piece, right up here up front. These, I didn't bring these because they're so fragile, but this is the Seal of Solomon. If you read some of the legends behind that, supposedly Solomon could cast out demons and things with that sign. It only dates to about 1400s in Israel, though. I mean, it's not super old. This is a Templar signet ring. They would bake their mark into wax with that. These folks had to have been small. I can barely, these go on my pinky. It's interesting. And then that is a Celtic bracelet from Germany that dates to about 3000 BC, really old. They're so fragile, I just didn't dare bring these. But anyway, really cool stuff. I do have some of these Yushabis, Egyptians. These were almost like prayer beads for the Egyptians. That's sort of the best analogy for the ancient Egyptians. Some of them are up here, really cool stuff. Not that hard to get too. I mean, those are out there if you're looking for them. So this is an example of a piece I bought that, who knows, I took the risk. It was in a family possession from Saudi Arabia. It's an Egyptian looking head, but I can't prove anything to you, but I bought it. I just thought it was really cool. Family claimed it was Egyptian and been in their family for hundreds of years, but that's up front. So that's an example of one that, I'll risk it not being real, but I really liked it. So who knew Romans made glass? So these are two examples here. That's a glass vial from Rome, and that's hanging on the little stand there. Be really careful with that too. And then glass beads that are Roman as well. So they did a lot of work with glass, and I didn't know that till a few years ago. And I like rocks and fossils and stuff. So I didn't bring these, but these are just some examples there. But just to sum up here, as Wayne May likes to say, Columbus was last. There was a modern expedition here where they built the exact replica of a Phoenician ship, and to prove that the Phoenicians could do it, and they easily made it to the Americas and back. So Columbus was last, right? Lots of other cultures here before Columbus. All right, thank you. Come up.